So I just finished up my reread of Dark Age by Pierce Brown, and I finally decided that, you know what, I love this series so much, of course that series being Red Rising, these beautiful books behind me, that I decided I need to do a why you should read about these books, because I want you all to know why you should be reading these books if you aren't already, or you know what, do a reread. So as I said in the intro, I'm here to tell you why you should be reading this fantastic sci-fantasy series by Pierce Brown, who I think, honestly, right now, outside of Christopher Ferracchio, is one of the best currently working sci-fi authors around. And yes, this is particular to my kind of sci-fi fantasy blend that I love dearly, but it just works for me on so many levels that I want to explain that to you all. So this series, I actually got started a couple years back on it based on Mike's review and or promotion of this book series. I'm not gonna lie, it is my favorite series of sci-fi now, but at the time I barely got through Red Rising, the first book. I thought it was a little bit juvenile. I thought there was a little bit too much reliancy on familiar tropes and Hunger Game type scenarios that the characters were put in, mostly just being the sort of like battle royale aspect that focuses pretty heavily on a certain section of that book. And I almost DNF'd it, I think 3 or 4 times. It wasn't working for me. And it wasn't until I got to the end of that book that I was like, okay, I think I see where this is going. I'm going to give this, the old college try and keep going on the series. And then Golden Sun completely blew me away. So what's interesting about this series is, one, I completely understand why some people just don't click with it, and I myself didn't when I first read it. And that's due in part to a couple of things. One, the focus of the first trilogy is through your main POV of Darrow of Lycos. And Darrow is the entire POV of this whole world, multiple planets, multiple races, war, love, politics. He is your focus. So much like Harry Dresden is in the Dresden Files, you see everything through his eyes. Now that's told in a different sort of writing style, obviously, compared to this, but this is first person present, and that turns a lot of people off. You're basically in the moment with him, which also means you're in his head. He is your only POV. He is your lens through which you see this world. And because of that, there's a couple of downfalls to some of the writing, at least early on, where there's some things that are a little bit kept from you that probably shouldn't be because you're literally in this guy's head. So like some of the twists and turns, if you're along for the ride like I am, it doesn't really bother you. If you want to pick apart books or you think things aren't really making sense, because you should know that the character knows this, why doesn't the reader know it? I feel you. I believe that's the worst parts of that are in this book, and there's 1 or 2 moments throughout the original trilogy that it's just like, you're really stretching this, but it's so cool and so well done that it doesn't really bother me. So getting those minor gripes out of the way, the reason this works for me so well is because Pierce Brown does a couple of things really, really well. I think he does character work incredibly well. I love Darrow as a character. He's melodramatic. He's hard-headed. He's hot-headed. He's passionate and damn near everything he does. He is an incredible fighter. And because this is a military-focused fantasy sci-fi blend, of course, with war being at the center of it, especially in the original trilogy when you are in Darrow's POV, I'll get to the second half later of, I was going to say trilogy, but now it's going to be 4 books, so quartet. Because you're in his head and he is essentially a war general, you get so many action set pieces, which Pierce Brown knocks out of the park every time. The action that he writes is so thrilling, so captivating, so page-turning that it's really hard to put it down, and the books don't slow down very much, especially in the first trilogy before it expands to more of like a space opera with multi-POVs in the second arc of this story. You are just adrenaline, just full adrenaline all the way through. It's combat to combat to combat, and it's exhilarating and thrilling. There are a couple of moments throughout where Pierce Brown really does twists and turns very well, outside of the few that you could argue don't make sense. There's some really gripping moments in this series that hit me just as hard as certain things that happen in A Song of Ice and Fire. And that's really difficult to do, especially for me reading books. I don't normally get caught off guard too much by things, and twists and turns don't generally hit me the same way as it would in like a movie or a TV show. But these books really did that for me incredibly well. And that's because of Pierce Brown's second thing that he does so well. Sorry, my watch is going off. And that's due in part to what Pierce Brown does incredibly well, which is character work. These characters in this story are incredible beyond just Darrow, because again, Darrow's your focus. You get the most of him, his personality, his wants, his needs, his dislikes, the whole gamut. He's an incredible character to follow, but all of the side characters that don't even really come into their own until books 2, 3, 4, 5, probably 6 and 7, they're so well done in the small amounts that you get them in that they're truly impactful. And Pierce Brown does not pull punches, much like George R. R. Martin in A Song of Ice and Fire. He will kill characters. And after talking with Leanna, who is also a diehard Red Rising fan, who actually asked Pierce Brown about this, I believe he literally throws names in hats and pulls them as to if characters are going to die or not, which is just insane to me. Writing yourself into potential corners with that would be just crazy. But I applaud him for that, because that's terrifying. Please don't hurt my characters. And when you do lose some of these characters, man, they go out in some really tough ways. These books are not, I know it's kind of marketed toward like a younger audience, at least for the first trilogy. These books are very adult. I know I said the first book was written sort of juvenile-ish. Like it felt like a young, angry 20-year-old writing it, which I guess kind of makes sense because, as I hear, that's what he was at the time. But it just, it's very violent. There are dismemberments. There is lots of blood and gore throughout these books. Lots of trigger warnings here, there, and everywhere. If that kind of stuff bothers you, it's very prevalent here. This is not a nice world. So in addition to the characters, the pacing, and the action, because the pacing is fantastic. Like I said, these books don't let up, which is why I love them so much. They're really hard to put down. The dialogue between these characters. Now, that's part of why his characters are so strong, especially these side characters, because they all feel very unique and distinct from one another. So whether it be Darrow or Mustang or Severo, who is just like the greatest sidekick character ever, to Cassius, to any of the villainous characters. I'm not going to spoil anything in this, so don't worry about me wrecking any kind of plot points or character moments, but all the characters feel authentic to their wants and desires, and that really grows throughout the series, where sometimes I'm like, why would they ever believe that? But then when you think about the structure of this world and society, and who's at the top and who's at the bottom, and the entire sort of color scheme hierarchy that Pierce Brown has created, which I'll put here, really sets the stage for why the revolution that happens in this whole trilogy, and really beyond just the trilogy, happens, and why these colors in society believe their place in society should be that way. All these things that sort of unravel throughout the series are really eye-opening, and then you start to understand why things are the way that they are. Because again, when this starts out, you're introduced to Darrow, who's a Red, who is basically the slave labor of society. They are terraforming Mars, as they're told, to prepare it for human life to live on Mars. So they think they're doing this great thing for society, blah, 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 blah. It's very quickly explained to you that that's all a lie. They are not terraforming this for society. People have lived on Mars and other planets for decades, for centuries, however long it's been. These places are fully populated. They've been lied to essentially by the ruling class of the Golds, which is very quickly explained to you, which is kind of the opening of this series, and why this whole Red Rising happens is because the Golds at the top of the totem pole have lied to society. They've sort of set up all these colors to be in their roles in society, and they don't want to break that because they're the ruling class. Why would you? And they also happen to be all 7 to 10 feet tall, gigantic god humans, while the Reds are, built smaller. They're feeble compared to a Gold. They're meant to work in mines. Like, this entire society that's in place is in place because of the way that Gold wants society to run. And that is the spark for this entire uprising that is the sort of through line of this entire series. Something else that Pierce Brown does phenomenally well, and he actually grows into this, I feel, is his writing literally just improves book to book. I don't know a way of like explaining that intelligently outside of, if you read the first book and then you read books 2, 3, and 4, it's almost as if a different person wrote it, because he is night and day different as far as how technically sound he is writing a book, especially when he gets beyond Morning Star, which takes the series 10 years into the future at the start of Iron Gold. And he branches this into a full-blown space opera where you have multi-POV stories. You're introduced to new characters. You have 4 to 5, I believe, POVs in both Iron Gold and Dark Age. I forget the specific number of exactly how many POVs there are, but he really takes on a much different scope of the story, which he does just as well. And when I first read Iron Gold, which again, I think the reread really helped me here, because I know up to Dark Age where things go, and I appreciate everything that built up to that point. So on a reread, I really enjoyed some of the stuff that I disliked before. I saw with a different set of eyes, because what he does in Iron Gold, which I disliked the first time around, was there was significantly less Darrow at points, and I wanted more Darrow. I love Darrow, and I love his entire story arc through Morning Star. And then into this multi-POV story, I got 2 new POVs that personally I didn't care for. I wasn't connecting with the characters. I didn't really like their perspective on the world and society around them. They just weren't fun for me to follow. Having reread it now, completely different. I have a totally different view of them, and I understand entirely what Pierce Brown was going for now, because in this multiple POVs, it's not just following this one guy for his purpose. You're now introduced to, 3 to 4 other perspectives on the world around them. What happened in this rising? What side are they on? Who do they actually value in this world? What color are they on this hierarchy? And what does that mean for them personally and their role that they play in this overarching story? So Pierce Brown just knocked it out of the park again when he branched out and decided, I'm not just going to continue Darrow's story, but all of these other people who may or may not have been around during that time, and how it's affecting them and their life, and then how they all play into this overarching story. It's so well done that I find very little fault in a lot of these books, especially as it gets longer. It's an adrenaline rush. There's still tons and tons of combat and fighting, but because he branches out to characters that aren't just Darrow, that's the warmongering general that he is, you get more slowdown periods. You get a lot more politicking. You get a lot more conversations that you may not have gotten if you were just in Darrow's head. And that's a good breath of fresh air in the series. And he tackled that incredibly well and with finesse, where all of these characters are interesting for different reasons, and the way that they tie into the story are honestly all captivating. And I love how he's brought this all together. And up through Dark Age, which very much earns his name because that book is heavy and tough to get through because of how dark the material is. He's molding this into this big, epic, violent as hell, dark, grim space opera, and I love it. And I have no idea what now to expect with Lightbringer coming later this month, which is why I decided to finally make this video after rereading these books. It's not even just that book anymore. I thought it was going to be 2 trilogies. This is book 6 coming out, and then book 7, I hope, comes out next year or the year after to finally wrap this up. But man, the way that he has built this up from a almost Hunger Games in space, which is what it gets referred to all the time with Red Rising, to this full-blown space opera now, where you're spanning solar systems, and the cast is massive, and you care about all these characters, and each of their POVs are interesting. He's just done all of this so well that from the technology that he's invented for this world, I'll say mostly believable way that they live in space in some of these societies, the introduction to, potentially not entirely human aspects. It's one of those sci-fi stories where it's very focused on the human aspect of it. There aren't a bunch of alien races and like Sun Eater, I love, by Christopher Accio. There's no Cielson. There's no like big, bad, evil alien that's like threatening society that everyone kind of has to fight against. This is very much a human on human tale and struggle and revolution at the heart of it. And it's just so well done. I love the characters, the pacing, the action. It's just, it's got to be my favorite sci-fi series that's going right now. And I have no doubt in my mind right now that Lightbringer is going to knock me on my ass, and the wait for Red God is going to be terrible because I want to see how this is going to end. Based on the way the Dark Age ends, I don't even know what the heck is going to happen in Lightbringer, and that scares me. But I'm also incredibly excited because it's got to be my most anticipated book of the year. Pierce Brown, when he writes books, I pay attention. So I hope you do too. I hope I did a decent job of selling the series on you. It's fantastic. You all should read it. Yeah. Go read Red Rising, please. It's fantastic. And honestly, just to like this series just means a lot to me. I mean, shit, my entire channel is not focused on Red Rising. I have reviews for all the books, but like my background of my Discord and my channel and my Patreon and everything is dedicated to Red Rising. I love this shit, man. That's gonna do it for me, guys. Until next time, go read Red Rising.